in, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far and wide our viewers are tuning in. Now, imagine this. Rimuru, the adaptive, suddenly enters the Tokyo Ghoul universe. What happens next? Let's find out. The transition is instant, violent in its silence. Rimuru doesn't fall from the sky or crash into the ground. He simply exists again, standing beneath flickering streetlights surrounded by concrete towers that loom like indifferent giants. This isn't a fantasy kingdom, nor a battlefield soaked in magic. The air here feels heavy, polluted not just by smoke and rain, but by something deeper, fear. Rimuru senses it immediately, seeping through the streets, hiding in alleyways, clinging to every heartbeat that passes by. His analytical mind scans the environment, and what he finds unsettles even him. There's no mana flow, no familiar magical signatures. Instead, there's hunger, raw, predatory, and constant. As Rimuru moves through the city, he observes humans rushing past, eyes down, shoulders tense, as if they know something is wrong but refuse to acknowledge it. Then he feels it, a presence watching him. Not curious, not cautious, hungry. From the shadows a figure shifts, its intent sharp and unmistakable. Rimuru doesn't panic, he studies. The being's biology is warped, human on the surface but twisted beneath, powered not by magic but by an unnatural adaptation centered around consumption. This world, Rimuru realizes, has evolved cruelty into a survival mechanism. When violence finally erupts nearby, it's fast and horrifying. A scream cuts through the rain, followed by silence. Rimuru arrives moments later to find blood staining the pavement and a ghoul feeding without hesitation. There's no dramatic villain speech, no ritualistic evil. Just necessity, just hunger. Rimuru freezes, not out of fear, but understanding. These creatures aren't demons born from malice. They are victims of a world that demands flesh as payment for existence. His predator skill activates instinctively, analyzing cocoon structure, regeneration patterns, neural responses. The data floods in, but something unusual happens. For the first time since his evolution, Rimuru hesitates to act. This hesitation marks a turning point. Rimuru has faced monsters, gods, and armies, but Tokyo offers something far more disturbing. A system where suffering is normalized, where monsters are created by design, and where survival itself is a moral compromise. As sirens echo in the distance and footsteps approach, Rimuru understands one undeniable truth. In this world, power alone won't change anything. And as he slips back into the shadows, unseen but very much present, the balance of Tokyo begins to shift in ways no one yet realizes. Rimuru doesn't stay hidden for long. The city itself seems to test him, pulling him deeper into its veins. From rooftops to underground passages, he watches patterns form, ghouls hunting at night, investigators cleansing streets before dawn, civilians trapped between ignorance and terror. Every encounter sharpens his understanding of this world's unspoken rule. If you are different, you are prey. If you are strong, you are hunted harder. Rimuru listens to whispered conversations, scans surveillance feeds, and absorbs fragments of information left behind in blood and fear. The name surfaces repeatedly, spoken with equal parts hatred and reverence. Ghouls. Not monsters in legend, but a species forced into the shadows by biology itself. When Rimuru finally allows himself to be seen, it's unintentional. A young ghoul, reckless and starving, lunges at him in a deserted subway corridor. The attack is clumsy, driven by desperation rather than skill. Rimuru reacts without thinking. The strike never lands. Space bends subtly as Rimuru redirects the force, immobilizing the attacker without tearing flesh or spilling blood. The ghoul thrashes, confused, terrified. Rimuru scans deeper now, peeling back layers of genetic corruption, tracing the root of this hunger to a cruel evolutionary dead end. This body was never meant to survive in peace. For the first time, Rimuru feels something unfamiliar settle into his consciousness: pity. The ghoul expects death. Instead, Rimuru releases him. No threat, no warning, just understanding. The ghoul flees, shaken, spreading rumors into the underground of something worse than the CCG, something that doesn't kill. Word travels fast in a city built on secrets. Soon other eyes begin watching Rimuru, calculating whether he is a miracle or a menace. From the rooftops, veteran ghouls observe his movements. From control rooms, investigators notice gaps in data, anomalies that don't fit known classifications. Rimuru has become a variable in a world that survives by strict definitions. As night deepens, Rimuru reflects on the irony of this universe. In other worlds, power brought clarity. Here, power only exposes hypocrisy. Humans call ghouls monsters, while building institutions dedicated to extermination. Ghouls justify murder as survival, while clinging to fragments of humanity they pretend not to need. Rimuru understands now that this isn't a war waiting to be won. It's a cycle waiting to be broken. But breaking it will require more than strength. It will require rewriting the very rules of existence in a city that feeds on fear. And somewhere in Tokyo, unseen cameras adjust, elite investigators mobilize, and ancient ghouls smile in anticipation. The slime who walked into their world without hatred has unknowingly declared his presence. The question is no longer whether Rimuru belongs here. It's whether this world is ready for the consequences of his compassion. Rimuru senses the shift before anyone else does. The air tightens, not with magic, but with attention. Tokyo is watching him now. Not the city itself, but the forces that rule it, from the shadows and fluorescent-lit offices alike. He becomes more deliberate, moving through crowds during the day, slipping through back streets at night, testing how easily this world reacts to something it cannot label. Humans pass him without a second glance, unaware that the calm figure beside them is silently dissecting the structure of their society. Ghouls, however, feel it. An instinctual pressure, like standing too close to an apex predator that doesn't bother to hide its teeth. One evening, Rimuru follows a familiar scent of fear into a dilapidated apartment complex. Inside, he finds a small group of ghouls arguing in hushed voices. They're not planning an attack, they're rationing. A single body divided into portions, debated with the grim efficiency of people choosing who gets to live a little longer. Rimuru doesn't interrupt at first. He listens. The words aren't cruel. They're tired, exhausted. When he finally steps forward, silence crashes over the room. Kagoon flares instinctively, reflexes honed by years of persecution. Rimuru raises a hand, calm, unthreatening, but the power behind that calm is unmistakable. He speaks not as a king, not as a god, but as an observer. He asks questions no one has ever dared to ask them. What would you eat if you didn't have to kill? What would you become if hunger stopped defining you? The ghouls don't answer. Some laugh bitterly. Others stare at the floor. Hope in this world is a dangerous illusion. Rimuru understands that words alone won't pierce generations of trauma. So he does something unprecedented. He offers proof. Using the data he's gathered, Rimuru synthesizes a nutrient mass within his own body, mimicking the biochemical energy ghouls extract from human flesh. He doesn't claim it will change everything. He simply offers it. One ghoul, shaking, steps forward. The moment the substance is consumed, Rimuru watches closely. The hunger doesn't vanish instantly, but it dulls. The pain eases. The ghoul doesn't scream. He doesn't reject it. He breathes. For several seconds, no one speaks. Then the room erupts, not in celebration, but disbelief. Rimuru has done what this world deemed impossible. But miracles never stay quiet. Surveillance picks up unusual activity. CCG analysts flag reports of ghouls surviving without recent kills. Higher authorities begin to connect dots they don't understand. To them, Rimuru isn't a savior. He's a destabilizer. A threat to the fragile order that keeps monsters and humans neatly separated. Rimuru feels their attention settle on him like a crosshair, but he doesn't retreat. If anything, his resolve sharpens. Because now he knows the truth. Tokyo doesn't run on justice or evil. It runs on fear of change. And Rimuru has just introduced something far more dangerous than violence, an alternative. The aftermath ripples outward faster than Rimuru anticipates. Within nights, whispers spread through back alleys and abandoned stations of a presence that doesn't hunt, doesn't judge, and doesn't demand blood. Some ghouls seek him out in desperation, others in disbelief, a few with blades already drawn, convinced this is another trap laid by humans. Rimuru welcomes all of them the same way, calm, observant, unmoved by threats. Each encounter deepens his understanding of how thoroughly this world has taught its people to expect cruelty. Trust here isn't broken. It was never allowed to form. At the same time, the CCG tightens its grip. Patrols increase. Investigators analyze footage frame by frame, disturbed by how often Rimuru appears just outside operational logic. No Kagoon, no Quinque response, no measurable combat signature, just absence. To them, that absence is terrifying. Some argue he must be classified as a new ghoul type. Others suggest something worse. A singular entity capable of undermining the entire foundation of their war. Orders are drafted. Observation turns into preparation. Tokyo has decided that whatever Rimuru is, he cannot be allowed to choose his own role. Rimuru senses the impending collision and understands that this segment of the story can only end one way. He cannot remain a shadow forever. This world will force a confrontation, whether he desires it or not. Standing atop a rain-soaked building, neon lights bleeding into the streets below, Rimuru looks down at a city that survives by pretending nothing can change. He doesn't feel anger toward it. He feels responsibility. Because now that he's shown them another path, walking away would be its own kind of cruelty. Far below, a young investigator hesitates before entering an alley marked for extermination. Somewhere else, a ghoul stares at human food, wondering for the first time if hunger might not own them forever. These moments are small, almost invisible, but Rimuru recognizes them for what they are. Fractures. The beginning of collapse or rebirth. As thunder rolls across Tokyo's skyline and multiple factions move into position, one truth becomes impossible to deny. The city that feeds on fear has encountered something it cannot consume. And as Rimuru steps forward, no longer hiding, no longer observing from a distance, the first chapter of Tokyo's transformation closes. Not with destruction, not with conquest, but with the quiet, irreversible act of defiance against a world that believed suffering was the only way to survive. The first true clash is inevitable. Tokyo doesn't allow anomalies to exist without response, and Rimuru's presence has begun to distort the ecosystem both humans and ghouls rely on. It happens in a district known for disappearances, a place where even veteran investigators hesitate to patrol alone. Rimuru feels the intent long before the attack begins, a sharpened killing instinct refined through countless hunts. This is no starving ghoul driven by desperation. This is a predator who enjoys the act itself. When the Kagoon erupts from the darkness, it's fast, precise, and lethal by design, striking from multiple angles with practiced cruelty. Rimuru doesn't dodge out of fear. He allows the attack to reach him, just enough to understand it. The Kagoon makes contact, slicing through his outer form, and in that instant Rimuru's predator skill dissects everything. Structure, composition, regeneration speed, neural command pathways. The Kagoon isn't just a weapon, it's an extension of identity, molded by trauma and sharpened by obsession. The ghoul recoils as Rimuru's body reforms effortlessly, the damage erased as if it never existed. Confusion flashes across the attacker's face, followed immediately by exhilaration. For the first time, he's found prey that fights back. The battle escalates, tearing through the street with brutal efficiency. Concrete shatters. Cars overturn. To any human observer, it would look like a massacre in progress, but this isn't chaos. It's a dialogue between predators. The ghoul adapts, shifting Kaguni forms mid-fight, abandoning elegance for overwhelming force. Rimuru responds in kind, not by copying blindly, but by optimizing. His form subtly changes, absorbing the principles behind Kaguni combat rather than the weapon itself. Every strike Rimuru blocks teaches him more about the world's cruel logic. Here, evolution isn't a gift, it's a requirement. As the ghoul presses harder, something snaps inside him. He realizes he isn't hunting anymore. He's being studied. That realization ignites panic masked as rage. He unleashes everything, a final desperate attempt to dominate or die. Rimuru ends it in a single motion. No explosion, no spectacle. He immobilizes the ghoul completely, locking down regeneration, severing Kaguni control without destroying the body. The silence afterward is suffocating. The ghoul lies there, alive, aware, and utterly powerless. This outcome is worse than death in a world that respects only strength. Rimuru looks down at him, not with contempt, but clarity. This is what unchecked predation creates. Monsters who no longer remember why they fight, only that they must. Rimuru doesn't kill him. Instead, he absorbs the excess Kaguni energy, stabilizing the ghoul's form just enough to prevent self-destruction. It's an act that defies every rule of this universe, a predator who refuses to finish the hunt. And as distant sirens begin to close in and hidden observers transmit everything they've seen, Rimuru understands that this encounter has crossed a line. From this moment forward, he is no longer a rumor whispered in fear. He is proof that even the strongest predators in this world are no longer at the top of the food chain. The aftermath doesn't belong to Rimuru alone. The defeated ghoul is recovered by his own kind before the CCG can arrive, spirited away into the underground with a story that spreads faster than fear itself. A story of a fight that should have ended in death, but didn't. Among ghouls, this changes everything. Strength has always been currency in their world, but Rimuru introduces a terrifying new concept: power without cruelty. For some, that idea is inspiring. For others, it's unforgivable. Rimuru becomes a measuring stick. Veteran ghouls test the edges of his influence, sending enforcers and champions, each one more refined than the last. These aren't random encounters. They're assessments. Each battle reveals a different philosophy of predation. Some ghouls fight with elegance, conserving energy, striking only when victory is assured. Others fight like storms, overwhelming opponents through sheer brutality. Rimuru absorbs it all, not as trophies, but as data. He learns how deeply violence is ingrained into their culture, how survival has been mistaken for identity. One confrontation stands out: a ghoul who has lived long enough to remember the early days of persecution, whose Kagun bears the scars of countless battles. This predator doesn't rush. He circles Rimuru slowly, speaking of the world as it is, not as it should be. To him, Rimuru's mercy is weakness dressed as hope. Their clash is quieter, deadlier, each movement deliberate. Rimuru feels it then. This ghoul isn't driven by hunger or madness. He's driven by certainty, the belief that nothing ever truly changes. When Rimuru subdues him, the victory feels heavier. The ghoul doesn't curse or plead. He simply asks one question: how long until they prove you wrong? Rimuru doesn't answer immediately, because the question isn't an attack, it's a warning. This world doesn't reject monsters, it creates them to justify its own fear. Rimuru releases him as well, leaving behind doubt where conviction once lived. Above ground, the CCG notices the pattern. Ghoul activity isn't decreasing, it's transforming. Fewer random killings, more disappearances without bloodshed. Investigators debate whether this is escalation or containment. Some push for immediate elimination of the anomaly causing it. Others hesitate, troubled by the sudden absence of bodies. Rimuru has turned the hunt into something unrecognizable, and institutions built on predictability begin to fracture. As Rimuru moves through the city, predator after predator steps aside, not out of fear, but calculation. They sense it now. This isn't prey pretending to be strong. This is something rewriting the rules they've survived by. And in the dark corners of Tokyo, the most dangerous ghouls begin to stir. Not because they want Rimuru dead, but because they want to know if he can truly endure what comes next. The confrontations grow sharper, more intentional. These are no longer chance encounters in forgotten districts. Rimuru is lured into carefully chosen battlegrounds, places heavy with history and blood, abandoned theaters, underground transit hubs, ruined wards sealed off after massacres long erased from public record. Each location carries the weight of the past, and the ghouls who challenge him here do so with purpose. They want to know if Rimuru can survive not just their strength, but their resentment. These are predators shaped by generations of hatred, and they fight as if the world itself is watching. Rimuru begins to recognize patterns in their tactics. Coordinated ambushes, Kagoons synchronized to overwhelm regeneration limits, psychological warfare meant to provoke rage or force lethal responses. They aren't testing his power anymore, they're testing his restraint. And in that restraint, Rimuru discovers the true difference between himself and every predator in this world. He doesn't grow stronger by dominating others. He grows stronger by refusing to become what they expect. During one particularly brutal clash, Rimuru is momentarily pinned, layers of Kaguna binding his form, crushing, shredding, attempting to overwhelm his adaptive core. For the first time since arriving in Tokyo, he allows himself to feel pressure. Not dangerous, responsibility. If he responds with annihilation, he proves them right. If he falls, he proves them right in a different way. The answer forms with unsettling clarity. Rimuru adapts not by amplifying violence, but by neutralizing its necessity. He alters the battlefield itself, absorbing structural elements, dampening kinetic force, reducing every attack to diminishing returns. The predators realize too late that their strength has become irrelevant. The surviving ghouls retreat, shaken. Word spreads quickly now, not just of Rimuru's power, but of his refusal to kill even when pushed to the edge. Among younger ghouls, something shifts. They begin to question the stories they were raised on, that humans must be hunted, that mercy is a lie, that monsters can never choose another path. Rimuru has become a living contradiction, and contradictions are dangerous in a world built on absolutes. The CCG responds with escalation. Specialized units are deployed. New Quinque prototypes are authorized for field testing. Files long buried are reopened, comparing Rimuru's encounters to forgotten anomalies that once threatened to disrupt the balance. Some investigators privately admit the truth they cannot say aloud. This entity isn't a ghoul, it's an evolutionary event. And events like that cannot be negotiated with. They can only be controlled or erased. Rimuru senses the tightening net and understands the irony. The more he restrains himself, the more dangerous he appears. In a world defined by predator and prey, refusing to play either role is the greatest provocation of all. As night falls and multiple forces converge on his location, Rimuru prepares not for battle, but for revelation. Because if this world insists on treating him as a monster, then it will have to face a monster that does not feed on fear, blood, or dominance, but on choice. The convergence is explosive, but not chaotic. Ghouls emerge from every direction, some eager, some hesitant, others already questioning why they're here at all. Moments later, CCG units flood the perimeter, weapons raised, floodlights slicing through the darkness. For the first time since Rimuru's arrival, predators from both sides stand in the same space, united by a single target. Rimuru stands between them, calm, unreadable, fully aware that this is the moment the world decides what he is allowed to be. An elite ghoul steps forward, one whose reputation alone has ended countless lives. His Kagoon unfolds like a crown of blades, and he smiles as if welcoming an old friend. To him, Rimuru represents the ultimate hunt, proof that even evolution can be devoured. The clash that follows is swift and devastating. Kagun and Quinkei tear through the ground, shockwaves rippling through nearby buildings. But at the center of it all, Rimuru remains composed, adapting in real time, not escalating, but containing. He disarms without dismembering. He overwhelms without erasing. Each movement strips away the illusion that brutality equals superiority. The turning point comes when Rimuru shields a wounded investigator from a ghoul's killing blow. The act freezes the battlefield. Ghouls hesitate, stunned by the betrayal of expectation. Investigators falter, weapons shaking, confronted with a truth their training never prepared them for. The enemy they were sent to destroy has just chosen to protect one of their own. In that instant, the predator hierarchy collapses. Fear no longer knows where to point. Rimuru speaks, his voice carrying without force. He doesn't condemn. He doesn't threaten. He states a simple fact. This cycle ends because it can. Because someone finally has the power to refuse it. The words don't magically change hearts, but they fracture certainty. And certainty in this world has always been the sharpest weapon. As reinforcements arrive and command orders conflict, the battlefield dissolves into confusion rather than bloodshed. Some ghouls retreat, unwilling to attack again. Some investigators lower their weapons, haunted by what they've witnessed. Rimuru steps back into the shadows, not as an escape, but as a choice. He has made his point. By the time the night ends, nothing is resolved, but everything is different. The strongest predators in Tokyo have tested him and failed to break him. The institutions built on fear have seen their foundation crack, and Rimuru understands the cost of what comes next. He is no longer just an anomaly disrupting the food chain. He is the question that this world has spent generations avoiding. And as the city breathes in the uneasy silence left behind, one truth settles over Tokyo like a storm waiting to break. The age of unquestioned predation is over. What rises in its place will decide whether this world finally evolves or tears itself apart trying to stop it. Tokyo didn't explode after that night. It tightens. The city learns how to hide its fear better. Streets reopen, reports are sanitized, and official statements reduce an unprecedented clash into routine anti-ghoul operations. But beneath the surface, the masks crack. Within the CCG's headquarters, analysts replay fragmented footage of Rimuru again and again, slowing it down, isolating frames, searching for something familiar to hold on to. Kagun signatures don't match. Quinkei response patterns fail to register meaningful damage. Every classification they attempt collapses under scrutiny. Rimuru exists outside their taxonomy, and that terrifies them more than any known ghoul ever has. Internal divisions form almost immediately. One faction pushes for immediate extermination, arguing that an unclassifiable entity capable of neutralizing both ghouls and elite investigators is an existential threat. Another group hesitates, disturbed by eyewitness accounts of Rimuru shielding humans, disengaging from lethal force, and allowing enemies to retreat. These contradictions poison certainty. The CCG was built to fight monsters. What happens when the monster refuses to act like one? Rimuru becomes a file without a name. Not a ghoul, not human, not a weapon. Surveillance grids expand across Tokyo, quietly upgraded under the guise of counter-terrorism. Facial recognition flags anomalies that don't match human biometric norms. Movement patterns are mapped. Predictive models attempt to anticipate Rimuru's behavior, but they keep failing for the same reason. He doesn't act out of fear, hunger, or ideology. He acts out of choice. That makes him impossible to predict. As Rimuru observes these developments from the city's blind spots, he begins to understand the CCG more clearly. Their cruelty isn't born from hatred, but from institutional survival. They don't protect humanity because they believe in it. They protect it because their world collapses if they don't. Each investigator is both hunter and shield, wearing professionalism like armor to avoid confronting the cost of their mission. Rimuru recognizes the same cycle he's seen before, repeated in a modern bureaucratic form. The turning point comes when Rimuru intentionally allows himself to be tracked, a calculated risk. He lets cameras catch him walking openly through a crowded district, human form intact, expression calm. The effect is immediate. Control rooms light up. Orders are issued. Units mobilize. For the first time, the CCG doesn't respond to a massacre or an emergency. They respond to presence alone. Rimuru has become something that cannot be ignored. As investigators move in, Rimuru feels it. Not hostility, curiosity sharpened into obsession. This isn't just a hunt anymore. It's an inquiry. The CCG doesn't just want him eliminated. They want him understood, dissected, and, if possible, controlled. And in a city defined by masks, Rimuru prepares to meet the ones who believe they see the truth while hiding the most from themselves. The response is precise, almost surgical. Rather than overwhelming force, the CCG deploys containment specialists, investigators trained not to kill immediately, but to observe, provoke, and record. Rimuru notices the difference at once. Their movements are measured, their weapons held back just enough to invite reaction. They want to see how he fights when cornered. Rimuru obliges them, but only partially. He dodges rather than counters, redirects rather than crushes, shaping the encounter into a controlled exchange. Every decision is deliberate, every movement a statement. He will not be reduced to data without consent. As the engagement unfolds, Rimuru listens to their communications, parsing command hierarchies, tactical doctrine, and unspoken fear threaded through clipped professionalism. He hears names spoken with respect, ranks invoked like shields. These people trust structure, because it's the only thing standing between them and the monsters they hunt. Rimuru understands that breaking them would be easy. Convincing them would be far harder. An elite investigator finally steps forward, removing his mask. Not as a gesture of trust, but defiance. He demands answers. What are you? Why are you here? Rimuru meets his gaze without hostility and responds with unsettling honesty. He says he is not their enemy. He says the war they are fighting no longer serves the world they believe they are protecting. The words land like a blade turned inward. The investigator doesn't lower his weapon, but his certainty wavers. For a moment, the city seems to hold its breath. Inside the CCG, this interaction ignites panic and intrigue in equal measure. Some officials see an opportunity. An entity powerful enough to neutralize ghouls without collateral damage could be the ultimate solution. Others recoil at the thought of cooperation, warning that reliance on such a being would undermine human authority entirely. Meetings stretch late into the night, voices rising, strategies colliding. Rimuru has done nothing overtly hostile, yet the institution begins to fracture from within. Rimuru withdraws before the situation escalates, leaving behind confusion rather than casualties. Investigators report no fatalities, no missing personnel, no confirmed hostility. That absence becomes its own threat. The CCG thrives on clear lines. Rimuru erases them. Over the following days, he becomes a silent presence in their operations, intervening just enough to prevent bloodshed, disappearing before gratitude or resentment can solidify. Some investigators begin to anticipate him, even rely on his interference without admitting it. Tokyo's citizens remain unaware of how close their world is to changing. But behind the masks, behind the paperwork and protocols, a dangerous idea begins to spread within the CCG. If Rimuru is not a monster, then perhaps the system that created monsters is the true enemy, and systems, unlike ghouls, cannot be killed. Rimuru's presence begins to ripple through the CCG in subtle but unmistakable ways. Analysts notice anomalies in ghoul activity, patterns that no existing model can explain. Incidents that once demanded heavy-handed intervention are now resolved with minimal force, often occurring near areas where Rimuru has been seen. Reports are flagged, theories debated, and the very foundation of the CCG's operational logic starts to tremble. Investigators trained to rely on absolute rules begin to question their assumptions. Could a predator exist that refuses to prey? Could an anomaly be more than a threat, more than a variable to control? The higher-ups escalate quietly, fearing the loss of control more than the entity itself. Special units are formed under strict secrecy, combining Quinque experts with intelligence analysts in unprecedented ways. Surveillance grids are expanded with advanced AI. Drones patrol alleys previously deemed too dangerous, and every entrance and exit in central Tokyo becomes a monitored choke point. Yet despite all this, Rimuru remains elusive. He doesn't hide to evade capture. He hides because the city itself is watching, and he knows it. Every observation, every attempt at control only informs him further about the systems he's infiltrating. Rimuru begins to experiment subtly. He tests the limits of CCG protocol, appearing in unexpected locations, leaving evidence of his presence that is simultaneously obvious and meaningless. He doesn't attack, doesn't defend, and yet his influence spreads. Investigators debate over what they've seen, some dismissing it as coincidence, others whispering that they are witnessing an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. Even the most veteran members find themselves second-guessing decisions they once executed without thought. The city's balance, built on certainty and control, begins to crack under the weight of the unknown. Meanwhile, ghouls observe this new dynamic with a mixture of fear and fascination. Those accustomed to being hunted notice that Rimuru interacts differently with humans than with them. He doesn't kill to assert dominance, nor does he allow hunger to dictate his actions. Some ghouls see opportunity, others see betrayal. Rumors of a being who can stand between predator and prey without choosing either begin to spread. Underground networks chatter with theories. Is he a god, a weapon, or something else entirely? Whatever he is, Rimuru's neutrality forces ghouls to reconsider the rules they've lived by for decades. The CCG grows more desperate to categorize Rimuru, but each attempt produces contradictions. His capabilities are undeniable, yet his choices defy conventional logic. He doesn't act on fear, on survival, or even on self-interest. Each observation report generates more questions than answers, causing friction among operatives. Some argue for direct engagement, asserting that any delay could be fatal. Others argue that Rimuru's restraint indicates intelligence, perhaps even potential for cooperation, and caution is necessary. In meetings, debates spiral into tension, exposing cracks in the agency's unity. The organization that thrived on control begins to understand, in terrifying clarity, that not everything can be tamed with force. Rimuru, aware of the tension he has created, continues his careful navigation of the city. He intervenes just enough to prevent unnecessary loss of life, but never in a way that can be framed as allegiance. Each action subtly shifts perceptions, destabilizing both ghouls and investigators. Tokyo watches in silence, masked citizens oblivious to the currents reshaping their world. The CCG, meanwhile, becomes obsessed with patterns they cannot define, chasing a predator who exists beyond classification. Rimuru understands the irony perfectly. The city that thrives on masks now wears them for fear of losing control. And the being at the center of it all has no mask to wear at all. Rimuru's presence begins to influence not just the operations of the CCG, but the very philosophy that underpins it. Investigators who have encountered him firsthand start to question what defines a monster. Those trained to see ghouls as irredeemable enemies notice that Rimuru refuses to kill, even when given the opportunity. His restraint unsettles the experienced and confounds the young. In private, whispers circulate. What if this being isn't a threat at all, but a mirror? A mirror showing the CCG everything they've ignored in their pursuit of control. Their reliance on fear, their blind adherence to rules, their willingness to sacrifice morality for order. Rimuru begins using the city's own systems as tools for observation rather than targets. Cameras that monitor ghoul activity are analyzed in real time. Drones are followed from a distance to see which paths investigators prioritize. and traffic patterns are noted to predict human movement. He is everywhere and nowhere at once. Each action is deliberate but never violent. The city itself becomes a chessboard, and Rimuru plays without forcing a checkmate. He studies the strategies of humans and ghouls alike, noting how instinct, training, and ideology shape every decision. His adaptability allows him to anticipate conflicts before they erupt, intervening in subtle ways to prevent unnecessary bloodshed, yet never removing agency from those involved. The CCG, despite all its power and resources, begins to realize how little it actually controls. Analysts who once relied on rigid models of ghoul behavior find those models failing at every turn. Even elite investigators, skilled in strategy and combat, encounter situations where Rimuru's decisions defy prediction. It is not brute strength that makes him dangerous, but choice. In a world where fear drives every calculation, Rimuru's freedom of will becomes the most destabilizing force imaginable. Senior officials debate quietly, their voices edged with frustration and awe. Some see an opportunity to harness him, to turn a being of choice into a tool of enforcement. Others see a catastrophe waiting to unfold, an entity whose understanding surpasses all human frameworks and whose intentions cannot be dictated. Meanwhile, Rimuru observes the ghouls with the same patience and clarity. He notes how they respond to humans, to each other, and to him. Many are fearful, some curious, and a few outright hostile. He does not seek conflict, but conflict seeks him. Every encounter strengthens his comprehension of this universe's moral fabric. Unlike his past worlds, power here does not guarantee dominance, and intelligence alone cannot prevent death. Rimuru recognizes that the most dangerous entities in Tokyo are not the ghouls themselves, but the systems and expectations that shape them. Hunger, fear, and survival instinct have been weaponized over generations, and anyone who ignores that structure risks destruction. Rimuru's influence spreads subtly, yet inexorably. Ghoul leaders who once relied on fear to maintain order find their authority questioned as some followers are drawn to Rimuru's example. Investigators, too, begin to hesitate, considering alternatives to the harsh protocols they followed without question. The city grows tense, a delicate web of observation and counter-observation where every move is scrutinized, yet no one can fully predict the outcome. And at the center of it all stands Rimuru, calm, calculating, and unyielding, a singular presence who refuses to be defined by predator or prey, law or instinct, fear or violence. Tokyo is watching, the CCG is watching, and even the ghouls are watching, but none can anticipate what will come next. The masked city has glimpsed a truth it was never ready to face. And Rimuru remains the catalyst, the anomaly that challenges every rule they have lived by for decades. Rimuru understands something that no one else in Tokyo can fully grasp. Hunger in this city is more than a biological necessity. It is a curse, a chain that dictates behavior, alliances, and morality. For ghouls, it defines existence, shaping every decision, twisting every relationship. For humans, it justifies fear, aggression, and control. Rimuru realizes that true change requires more than defeating predators or evading hunters. It requires rewriting the very conditions that create hunger itself. If he can remove the compulsion to kill, even partially, he can force the world to reconsider what it means to survive. He begins his work quietly, methodically. Using his unique skills, he synthesizes nutrients that mimic the energy ghouls extract from human flesh. The first trials are small, given to ghouls in the fringes of the city who are desperate or curious enough to trust him. The initial reactions are mixed. Some recoil, unable to comprehend sustenance without suffering. Others, trembling with exhaustion, take it hesitantly. And then something remarkable happens. The ghoul pauses mid-hunger, realizes they no longer feel the gnawing need to hunt, and begins to process a concept long denied: choice. They are still predators, still powerful, still dangerous. But for the first time, they are not bound by necessity. Word spreads quickly through the underground. whispered across alleys and abandoned subway stations. Rumors circulate of a being who can feed without death, who offers an alternative to the endless cycle of violence. Some ghouls react with fear, seeing this as a challenge to the natural order. Others see hope, a fragile spark in a world defined by despair. Rimuru does not advertise his presence. He does not demand allegiance. He simply provides a path and waits for the curious and desperate to take it. Each ghoul who accepts the nutrient becomes a living experiment in evolution without cruelty. The CCG notices subtle shifts in patterns as well. Reports show fewer attacks, yet no increase in arrests or enforcement. Analysts grow increasingly perplexed. Could there be an unknown factor influencing ghoul behavior that is not rooted in traditional methods of control or combat? Elite investigators begin to question what they've always assumed, that ghouls will always hunt humans. The foundation of their world begins to quiver. Rimuru has introduced a variable that cannot be calculated, quantified, or contained. The balance of power has shifted not through force, but through understanding and adaptation. In the darker corners of the city, rival ghouls react differently. Those who thrive on chaos and blood see Rimuru's intervention as a threat. They cannot abide the notion that their prey might resist. Clashes erupt, not because of hunger alone, but because the hierarchy of fear is being challenged. Rimuru steps into these conflicts when necessary, not to dominate, but to prevent annihilation. He does not kill. He does not destroy. He recalibrates, and in doing so, he demonstrates the impossible. Predators can survive without becoming monsters, and monsters can exist without harming the innocent. Rimuru's presence begins to transform the culture of hunger itself. Where once ghouls scavenged in secret and humans patrolled in fear, there are now spaces where survival can be considered differently. Small pockets of collaboration form, not out of loyalty or ideology, but from the pragmatic realization that violence is no longer the only path. Even minor successes ripple outward, altering perception. The most hardened ghouls begin to reconsider what it means to eat, to live, to exist. The choice that Rimuru offers is simple yet profound. You do not have to kill to survive, and for a species defined by necessity, this is revolutionary. Rimuru also notices that not all accept the path willingly. Some ghouls attempt to sabotage his efforts, seeing his nutrient solution as a threat to their dominance. Others test its limits, consuming it alongside human prey to gauge its efficacy. Rimuru adapts to each scenario, analyzing outcomes, refining the composition, and learning as much from resistance as from acceptance. The city becomes his laboratory, a place where biology, morality, and choice intersect in ways previously unimaginable. Each success strengthens his resolve. Each failure teaches patience. He is patient because he knows that true transformation does not come from force. It comes from proving a better path exists and allowing the world to see it for itself. And yet, despite these small victories, Rimuru recognizes the danger of complacency. Not all humans will accept the change, and not all ghouls will embrace it. Powerful factions within both sides view his work as a direct threat to their authority. Tokyo's balance, already fragile, teeters on the edge of conflict. The CCG intensifies surveillance, ghouls plot in the shadows, and ordinary citizens remain oblivious to the tectonic shifts beneath their feet. Rimuru remains calm, aware that transformation is never instantaneous. He continues his quiet intervention, offering alternatives where none exist, guiding evolution without enforcing it. With each passing night, Rimuru's influence grows. He becomes a figure both feared and revered, a symbol that the impossible may be possible. Ghouls who once believed themselves slaves to hunger now question the rules that have governed their lives. Investigators, despite orders, begin to notice the cracks in their assumptions, the anomalies that cannot be explained by power or strategy alone. Tokyo, the masked city, has begun to feel the tremors of change, and at its epicenter stands Rimuru. the catalyst of a new path for the hungry, a living proof that survival does not require sacrifice, and that even in a city built on fear, a better way can exist. Rimuru's influence begins to take on a subtle, almost intangible form. It is no longer just about the nutrient he provides. It is about the concept of choice itself. For centuries, ghouls have operated under a simple equation: hunger equals action, kill or be killed. Humans have mirrored that logic in fear and enforcement, believing control must come through dominance. Rimuru introduces a third option, one that neither side has fully understood. He doesn't enforce it. He doesn't lecture. He merely demonstrates that survival can exist outside of predation, and the effect is profound. The first visible changes appear in ghouls who have long lived in the margins of society. They begin to patrol in small groups, not to hunt humans, but to monitor territory and protect weaker members. Hunger still exists, but it no longer dictates morality. The difference is subtle, almost invisible, yet transformative. A ghoul who once relied on fear to maintain dominance now offers guidance instead. Another, previously violent and impulsive, begins to cooperate with former rivals to share resources without conflict. These microcosms of change ripple through the underground, creating networks of influence that challenge centuries-old hierarchies. Even the CCG begins to notice patterns. Investigators report a decline in random attacks, fewer casualties in skirmishes, and a surprising level of restraint from ghouls previously considered uncontrollable. Analysts scramble to find explanations, suspecting new ghoul tactics or hidden leadership structures. What they fail to realize is that Rimuru has redefined the rules entirely. He is not leading, not commanding, but inspiring through example. The very act of refusing to kill, even when fully capable, becomes a strategy more effective than violence, reshaping behavior without a single order issued. Rimuru also understands that not all ghouls will willingly accept this new path. Some are too entrenched in tradition, too addicted to the power their hunger provides, or too fearful of change to trust his methods. When these factions resist, Rimuru intervenes carefully. He demonstrates the consequences of unnecessary violence without directly punishing aggressors, allowing them to witness outcomes that challenge their assumptions. He manipulates environmental conditions, reroutes supply lines, and neutralizes conflicts before they escalate, always maintaining the delicate balance between restraint and authority. Each intervention is precise, calculated, and non-lethal, gradually shifting perceptions in ways that brute force never could. Human observers, though unaware of the details, begin to sense the shift as well. Investigators report unexpected behavior during routine patrols, ghouls retreating rather than attacking, neutralizing threats without spilling blood, or even cooperating with humans in areas previously defined as hostile. Some attribute it to training anomalies, others to improved tactics, but the truth is far more profound. Rimuru has introduced a concept that cannot be taught, mandated, or enforced. It is self-determination, an idea so alien to the predator-prey dynamic that its effects are immediately destabilizing. Rimuru himself does not intervene for recognition or control. He acts because he understands the cost of unchallenged hunger, endless cycles of violence, oppression, and death. Every night he monitors the changes he has initiated, tracking how ghouls adapt to new ways of obtaining sustenance without harming humans, how rival factions begin to negotiate for influence rather than territory, and how humans slowly adjust their tactics in response to the unprecedented restraint displayed by those they once hunted without mercy. The city, masked and indifferent to most, is beginning to shift under the quiet but relentless pressure of an idea: that survival does not require the suffering of others. Even as these small victories accumulate, Rimuru remains aware of the dangers ahead. Powerful ghouls and entrenched human forces view his work as a direct threat to the established order. They see not just a challenge to authority, but a challenge to identity itself. Control has always been maintained through fear and dominance, and Rimuru has introduced an uncontrollable variable into that equation: Tokyo's balance is fragile, and one misstep could ignite chaos. Yet Rimuru continues undeterred, knowing that change is never immediate, knowing that true transformation requires patience, persistence, and the courage to offer a new path even when few are ready to follow. With every passing night, Rimuru's efforts extend further, touching corners of the city that have never known safety or trust. Small alliances form among ghouls who were once enemies. Investigators, begrudgingly observing the results, begin to question the methods they've followed for decades. Ordinary citizens remain blissfully unaware, yet they too are affected indirectly, as neighborhoods that were once battlegrounds see fewer disappearances, less violence, and the beginnings of cautious coexistence. Rimuru's path is not easy, and it is not complete, but it exists. And in a world defined by hunger, fear, and survival at any cost, simply existing as an alternative is a revolution in itself. Rimuru knows that subtle change alone is not enough to shift a city built on centuries of fear and blood. He begins to focus on building infrastructure for this new way of survival, creating spaces where ghouls can exist without preying on humans. Abandoned warehouses, old subway tunnels, and forgotten industrial districts are repurposed into safe zones where he can provide his synthesized nutrients in larger quantities. He ensures these locations are secure from rival ghouls who would exploit or destroy them, and he subtly integrates them into the city's existing layout so that they remain hidden from human authorities while being accessible to those willing to seek them. Over time, these refugees become microcosms of a new society, places where hunger does not dictate morality and survival can exist alongside cooperation rather than conflict. Word of these safe zones spreads through underground networks with astonishing speed. Ghouls who were once isolated, desperate, and violent begin to communicate, sharing knowledge of where sustenance can be found without killing. This cooperation is not mandated by Rimuru. He does not demand allegiance or obedience. Instead, he allows ghouls to discover the benefits of choice and self-control organically. As more ghouls participate, the concept begins to take root. Survival does not require cruelty, and strength does not have to be proven through violence. For some, it is liberating. For others, it is terrifying. Established hierarchies begin to erode as influence shifts from fear-driven dominance to voluntary respect earned through acts of restraint and guidance. The ripple effects reach the CCG in unexpected ways. Investigators report fewer brutal encounters and note instances of ghouls actively avoiding human contact, even when cornered. Analysts struggle to make sense of the data, attributing the changes to random fluctuations, misreporting, or previously undetected trends in ghoul behavior. Higher-ranking officials, however, begin to notice the anomaly. Patterns emerge suggesting a single influential entity capable of shaping ghoul activity citywide. Intelligence units attempt to track this presence, but Rimuru's adaptability and understanding of observation networks allow him to remain several steps ahead. Every attempt at detection is subtly countered, every patrol routed away, every dataset slightly skewed, not to harm humans, but to prevent interference with the fragile new order he is creating. Rimuru also begins experimenting with psychological influence, understanding that behavior is shaped as much by perception as by necessity. By demonstrating restraint, offering alternatives to hunger, and intervening in conflicts without violence, he encourages ghouls to reconsider their identities. Some ghouls, once consumed by the instinct to hunt, begin to engage in cooperative problem-solving with former rivals. Others take risks to protect humans, driven not by loyalty or obligation, but by the realization that their survival no longer depends solely on consumption. Even those resistant to change begin to observe, question, and in subtle ways imitate behaviors that defy tradition. In this quiet, incremental manner, Rimuru reshapes a culture that was previously governed by fear and brutality. The broader implications of Rimuru's interventions become apparent when rival factions of ghouls attempt to challenge his influence. They discover that brute force is ineffective. Attempts to sabotage nutrient distribution are neutralized not through violence, but through strategy, foresight, and the creation of fail-safes. Clashes that could have resulted in massacres are diffused with minimal harm. Rimuru demonstrates that power need not be synonymous with destruction, and that influence can be achieved through intelligence, patience, and vision. Over time, even hardened and skeptical ghouls begin to recognize that cooperation and restraint yield survival in ways that predation alone cannot provide. Meanwhile, humans are impacted indirectly. Investigators who have witnessed the subtle effects of Rimuru's interventions begin to doubt their assumptions about ghouls, morality, and control. Some question the methods the CCG has employed for decades. Others grow increasingly uneasy with the inability to predict ghoul behavior, creating internal tension and uncertainty within the agency. Rimuru's presence, therefore, does more than save lives. It destabilizes entrenched power structures on both sides of the predator-prey divide. The city begins to feel the first tremors of societal change as behaviors once considered immutable are gradually altered by the existence of an entity who refuses to play by the rules. Despite the progress, Rimuru remains cautious. Not all ghouls accept his path willingly, and not all humans can be persuaded of his intentions. Some factions plot against him, viewing the potential for cooperation as a threat to their control or identity. Others are motivated by greed, fear, or a desire to maintain dominance. Rimuru recognizes that these tensions are inevitable, but he continues his work undeterred. By creating alternatives, offering choices, and demonstrating restraint, he forces a world accustomed to violence to reconsider the very nature of survival. Every act, every intervention, and every opportunity for a ghoul to choose differently strengthens the fragile foundations of a new order, establishing a precedent that may one day transform the city itself. As the nights stretch on, Rimuru's network of influence grows, extending into areas previously dominated by violence and chaos. Safe zones expand, cooperation increases, and the very notion of hunger begins to lose its absolute grip on the city. Ghouls begin to experiment with alternative ways to sustain themselves, sharing discoveries and strategies. Investigators notice behavioral anomalies that cannot be explained by conventional logic. Ordinary citizens remain unaware, yet they benefit indirectly from fewer attacks and reduced violence in previously dangerous districts. Rimuru's intervention is quiet, subtle, and transformative, creating a foundation for a world in which survival no longer necessitates suffering, and hunger, for the first time, does not define existence. Rimuru's influence begins to extend beyond immediate survival. Ghouls who once lived isolated, fearful, and violent begin forming informal communities, sharing not just sustenance but knowledge, strategies, and even cultural practices previously suppressed by the need to survive at any cost. Cooperation replaces competition in small but meaningful ways. Neighborhoods once rife with fear become pockets of cautious trust. In these spaces, ghouls learn to regulate hunger, experiment with the nutrient Rimuru provides, and support each other in ways that were impossible before. The act of choosing restraint becomes a social norm in miniature, and with it comes a subtle shift in identity. Ghouls are no longer solely defined by what they must do to survive. They begin defining themselves by what they choose to do instead. These shifts do not go unnoticed by the CCG. Investigators report odd behaviors, ghouls refraining from attacks even when humans are vulnerable, groups dispersing without conflict, and once hostile factions engaging in cooperative efforts that defy conventional prediction. Analysts struggle to understand the cause, attributing changes to improved strategy or unobserved leadership, unaware that a single entity has rewritten the rules entirely. Debates erupt among CCG leadership. Some see a chance to exploit this new behavior for operational advantage, while others fear it could undermine authority and destabilize the system they rely upon. This ideological tension spreads throughout the ranks, creating a silent uncertainty that the CCG has never experienced. Meanwhile, rival ghouls who refuse Rimuru's influence escalate attempts to assert dominance, attempting to challenge the new networks he has fostered. They underestimate the cohesion and resilience of communities shaped by choice rather than fear. Rimuru intervenes, not with overwhelming force, but with precision. Conflicts are diffused through environmental manipulation, non-lethal immobilization, and strategic guidance. Aggressors are shown the consequences of their actions without bloodshed, and in some cases, they begin to witness firsthand the benefits of cooperation, even if grudgingly. Each successful intervention reinforces the idea that power can exist without predation, and that survival does not require cruelty. The impact on human society is equally profound, though less direct. Investigators and civilians alike notice changes in ghoul behavior that cannot be explained by training, surveillance, or force alone. Reports of disappearances decline, violent encounters decrease, and formerly dangerous districts experience a subtle shift in atmosphere. Investigators begin to question whether their understanding of ghouls, morality, and enforcement has been incomplete. Rumors of an unseen influence spread among CCG personnel, though no one can pinpoint its origin. The concept of an entity capable of reshaping behavior without violence challenges assumptions at every level, forcing the organization to confront a reality it was never prepared to handle. Rimuru remains deliberate, cautious, and patient. He understands that systemic change is never instantaneous. Not all ghouls will accept his methods, and not all humans can be persuaded to reinterpret their assumptions. He continues to expand his network of safe zones, provide alternatives to hunger, and intervene strategically to prevent unnecessary violence. Every choice reinforces the concept that restraint is possible and survival can exist without cruelty. Over time, the city begins to perceive the results indirectly. Patterns emerge. Districts once plagued by attacks become safer, communities grow stronger, and the rigid predator-prey hierarchy begins to blur. Even the most hardened ghouls cannot ignore the growing network of influence Rimuru has created. They begin to experiment with the alternative path he has established, testing restraint against instinct and discovering that survival without killing is not only possible but sustainable. Investigators observing these patterns experience a similar cognitive dissonance. Long-held assumptions about the nature of ghouls and their relationship with humanity are challenged. Every interaction, every observation, and every subtle intervention adds weight to the growing understanding that Rimuru has created a new paradigm. Hunger no longer dictates morality, and violence is no longer the only path to survival. By the end of this phase of his intervention, Rimuru had not conquered Tokyo. He has not eradicated hunger, fear, or conflict. What he has done is far more profound. He has introduced an alternative. He has proven that ghouls can exist without preying on humans, that communities can function without violence, and that choice can override instinct. The city, still masked and unaware on the surface, pulses with the beginnings of transformation beneath its streets. The predators and hunters alike are forced to confront the reality that a different way is possible. In a world defined by hunger, Rimuru has offered the first true alternative, and the seeds of a new path have been planted, fragile yet undeniable, ready to grow in the shadows of Tokyo. Tokyo has always thrived on equilibrium built through fear, predation, and control. Every predator knows its place, every human understands the cost of interference, and every ghoul learns early that survival requires ruthless adherence to the rules. But Rimuru's presence has shifted that balance in ways no one anticipated. Where once certainty governed the streets, now hesitation and unpredictability dominate. Investigators second-guess themselves, ghouls question instinct, and the ordinary citizens, though largely unaware, feel it in the tense quiet of alleys and the subtle changes in the city's rhythm. The hierarchy that defined Tokyo for decades is no longer absolute. The CCG in particular feels the pressure most acutely. Orders that once required immediate obedience are now debated, delayed, and sometimes ignored. Analysts scramble to make sense of anomalies that cannot be quantified. Surveillance reports indicate ghouls refraining from attacks, previously hostile factions cooperating, and neighborhoods stabilizing without CCG intervention. Attempts to engage or contain Rimuru fail consistently. Units dispatched to observe him report nothing more than his calm presence and measured actions. The paradox terrifies them. A being capable of immense power chooses restraint, and in doing so destabilizes every assumption the organization has relied upon. Among the ghouls, the effect is equally profound. Long-standing rivalries falter in the face of Rimuru's influence. Communities that once existed only to dominate territory now experiment with cooperation, distributing resources without conflict and establishing informal governance structures. Hunger still exists, but it is no longer the absolute law. Individual ghouls begin to weigh morality against instinct, power against consequence. Some adapt quickly, embracing the new paradigm and finding strength in restraint. Others resist, clinging to the old ways, but their influence wanes as fewer ghouls are willing to follow violence without necessity. Tokyo becomes a city of fragmented authority, where the old hierarchy is contested, uncertain, and eroding. Rimuru observes all of this with a combination of patience and calculation. He understands that a city cannot be reshaped overnight. The fractures he has created are intentional, designed to force reflection rather than immediate conformity. By demonstrating an alternative path and allowing both ghouls and humans to witness the consequences of restraint versus aggression, he subtly forces adaptation. Every choice he enables, every intervention he makes, is a lesson in balance disrupted. The predators of Tokyo can no longer assume supremacy, and the humans tasked with controlling them can no longer assume omnipotence. As the days pass, both sides begin to act unpredictably. Ghouls previously emboldened by fear of human enforcement hesitate before attacking. Investigators, confused by these deviations from expected behavior, adopt more cautious strategies, sometimes retreating from situations they would once have dominated. Conflicts erupt in unanticipated directions, fueled by uncertainty rather than malice. Rimuru intervenes when necessary, not to dominate, but to prevent catastrophic escalation. His actions are surgical, precise, and measured, demonstrating the power of calculated choice over instinct-driven aggression. The city itself begins to reflect this broken balance. Districts once ruled by fear see pockets of cautious cooperation emerge, while others remain volatile, testing the limits of the new paradigm Rimuru has introduced. Tensions spike unpredictably, yet total chaos is avoided. The streets of Tokyo, neon-lit and perpetually awake, pulse with a new energy, one that is both dangerous and hopeful, uncertain yet full of possibility. Ghouls who once relied solely on hunger for guidance now weigh decisions, and humans forced to confront these anomalies reconsider entrenched doctrines. The familiar predator-prey dynamic has been fractured, leaving a void that cannot be ignored. Rimuru understands that the city is at a tipping point. The balance may never return to its previous state, and that is precisely the point. The old order, built on fear, violence, and unquestioned hierarchy, cannot accommodate choice. By introducing the possibility of restraint, cooperation, and survival without predation, Rimuru has created a world in which the previous rules no longer apply. Every faction, human or ghoul, now faces decisions without clear precedent. Every action carries consequence, and every choice matters in ways previously unimaginable. As night descends, the full scope of the transformation becomes visible in small, subtle ways. Ghouls patrol neighborhoods not to hunt, but to monitor and protect. Investigators notice patterns of avoidance, restraint, and unexpected cooperation. Ordinary citizens, oblivious to the forces reshaping their city, benefit indirectly through reduced violence. Conflicts still occur, but they are no longer absolute or predictable. And at the center of this new, fractured ecosystem stands Rimuru, calm and unyielding, a singular force who refuses to be defined by predator or prey, law or instinct, hunger or dominance. The balance of Tokyo is broken, and in that break lies the first true opportunity for the world to choose a new path. The question now is no longer who will dominate the city, but whether the city itself can adapt. Rimuru has disrupted the foundations of fear, reshaped the rules of survival, and introduced a paradigm in which strength is measured not by violence, but by choice. Both humans and ghouls are forced to confront the limits of their understanding, the fragility of their power, and the possibility that coexistence may be achievable, but only if they are willing to embrace it. Tokyo is no longer a city of predators and prey. It is a city at the edge of transformation, where the consequences of choice ripple through every street, alley, and shadow. And at the center of this upheaval, Rimuru remains the calm eye of the storm, the catalyst of a future yet unwritten, a presence that challenges every assumption, every rule, and every instinct that has defined the city for generations. The consequences of Tokyo's fractured balance become increasingly tangible as both humans and ghouls grapple with the uncertainty Rimuru has introduced. Investigators who once relied on rigid protocols begin improvising, questioning long-held doctrines about ghouls and their behavior. Tactical decisions are no longer guaranteed to produce predictable outcomes. Some investigators hesitate before engaging, unsure whether restraint or aggression will yield the best results. Others, frustrated by the inability to control outcomes, grow reckless, inadvertently creating opportunities for conflict they cannot anticipate. The CCG itself, built on the principle of dominance through certainty, finds its authority challenged not by a single enemy, but by an entire paradigm that defies classification. Ghouls, too, feel the effects of the disrupted equilibrium. Packs that once maintained dominance through intimidation and preemptive attacks find their power undermined by smaller groups who choose cooperation over confrontation. Hunger, once an absolute law dictating behavior, now exists alongside the possibility of choice. Some ghouls embrace Rimuru's methods, learning to survive without killing, sharing resources and establishing tentative alliances with former rivals. Others resist, clinging to instinct and tradition, but even they must adapt as the rules of engagement in Tokyo have shifted irrevocably. Predation is no longer the sole path to survival, and that alone introduces instability into the predator hierarchy. Rimuru's interventions continue to be calculated and deliberate. He moves through the city with awareness of both human and ghoul perception, appearing just enough to influence outcomes without asserting dominance. He neutralizes threats when necessary, but does so in ways that preserve life, demonstrating that power need not be synonymous with destruction. Each act reinforces a simple but revolutionary idea. Survival does not require cruelty, and strength can exist without oppression. Through these quiet actions, Rimuru reshapes the very definitions of predator and prey, instilling doubt and curiosity in a world long ruled by fear. The city's infrastructure begins to reflect the fractured balance as well. Safe zones for ghouls grow more organized with coordinated patrols and shared resources. Investigators notice anomalies in crime patterns. Attacks occur less frequently. Areas previously dominated by violent factions become relatively stable, and incidents of unnecessary aggression decline. Yet these changes are not universal. Pockets of resistance and chaos remain, testing the limits of Rimuru's influence and maintaining the tension that defines a city at the edge of transformation. This duality, cooperation in some areas, conflict in others, creates an environment of constant unpredictability. Tokyo itself seems to respond to this shift. Neighborhoods once avoided by humans become contested, not by force, but by choice. Ordinary citizens, unaware of the subtle currents reshaping the city, navigate streets that are safer, yet more unpredictable. Ghouls who have adapted to Rimuru's alternative path begin interacting cautiously with humans, sometimes protecting them, sometimes simply avoiding confrontation. Investigators, meanwhile, begin seeing patterns that defy previous logic, forcing the CCG to rethink strategy and approach. The city is no longer a machine of fear and control. It has become a dynamic ecosystem where each action carries unforeseen consequences. Amid this upheaval, Rimuru remains a singular presence, calm and deliberate. He observes the city, intervening only when necessary, allowing humans and ghouls alike to confront the consequences of their choices. By refusing to dominate, he forces every faction to reckon with a reality in which their assumptions are challenged and their instincts questioned. The predator-prey hierarchy that once governed Tokyo has been irrevocably altered. Every corner of the city, from its shadowed alleys to its bustling streets, now reflects the tension between old instincts and new possibilities. In this broken balance, opportunity exists. The chaos of uncertainty creates space for cooperation, adaptation, and evolution. The CCG faces challenges that cannot be solved by brute force, and ghouls are confronted with choices they were never trained to make. The rules that once defined Tokyo no longer apply, and survival is no longer synonymous with domination. Rimuru has disrupted the city not by force, but by introducing the possibility of something different, something better, forcing both sides to question whether fear, instinct, and violence must continue to govern their lives. Tokyo has become a city where no one can rely on certainty. Humans cannot predict ghouls. Ghouls cannot rely on instinct alone, and the institutions designed to maintain order are forced to adapt or falter. In the midst of this instability stands Rimuru, calm, unyielding, and purposeful, a being whose existence challenges every assumption, every rule, and every instinct that has governed the city for generations. The balance of Tokyo is broken, and in that break lies the possibility of a new order, one not defined by fear or dominance, but by choice, consequence, and the courage to redefine survival itself. The fractures in Tokyo's balance continue to widen as Rimuru's influence spreads. Small pockets of ghouls, once isolated and ruled by fear, begin forming unexpected alliances. Former rivals share information, distribute nutrients provided by Rimuru, and experiment with cooperation in ways previously unimaginable. Even the most hardened, violent ghouls begin to reconsider their methods, noticing that restraint allows them to survive longer, avoid retaliation, and maintain influence without constantly risking life or territory. The predator-prey paradigm that defined the city for decades begins to blur, replaced by an ecosystem of choices where instinct must coexist with reason and consequence. For humans, the effects are equally disorienting. Investigators accustomed to relying on predictability now face anomalies at every turn. Ghouls they encounter may retreat when aggression seems justified, defend humans when attack is expected, or act unpredictably in ways that defy standard tactics. The CCG's hierarchical structure, built on control and certainty, struggles to accommodate these deviations. Analysts debate endlessly over what is happening, attempting to attribute patterns to training, strategy, or unknown leaders, failing to recognize the true source, Rimuru. The agency begins to fracture internally as officers argue over the correct approach to a situation that has no precedent. Conflict persists, but it no longer follows the same rules. Skirmishes erupt not simply from hunger or territory disputes, but from fear, uncertainty, and the tension between old instincts and new possibilities. Rival ghouls test the limits of Rimuru's influence, attempting to reassert dominance and preserve traditional hierarchies. Rimuru counters these challenges with precision, neutralizing threats without lethality, demonstrating a method of control through intelligence rather than violence. Each intervention subtly reinforces the notion that survival does not require cruelty, and that power can exist without oppression. Over time, these lessons propagate through the underground, changing behavior incrementally and reshaping social structures among ghouls. Even the city itself reflects the disruption. Neighborhoods once plagued by attacks begin to stabilize as ghouls experiment with coexistence. Safe zones expand, community networks strengthen, and resources are shared in a way that was impossible before Rimuru's arrival. Investigators notice a decline in unpredictable violence, and though some humans remain unaware of the source, the benefits are undeniable. Traffic, commerce, and everyday life persist with a fragile sense of security. The balance of power has shifted subtly yet irrevocably, as both humans and ghouls navigate a world where the old rules no longer apply. Rimuru's presence also influences human strategy indirectly. Investigators observing his interventions begin questioning their approach to ghouls. They notice patterns of restraint, unexpected cooperation, and calculated responses to conflict. Some begin experimenting with diplomacy, coordination, and containment rather than immediate aggression. Others resist the change, fearful of relying on uncertainty or of appearing weak to colleagues. The CCG, which once relied solely on brute enforcement, must now consider collaboration, negotiation, and observation as essential tools. The rigid lines between hunter and prey blur, leaving officers unsure how to proceed and forcing the institution to evolve under pressure. Ghouls continue to adapt to Rimuru's interventions in unexpected ways. Some embrace restraint voluntarily, protecting territories without attacking humans. Others use the nutrients as leverage to establish influence over rival factions. But even these manipulations are tempered by the need to survive without unnecessary violence. Rimuru observes these behaviors carefully, understanding that transformation cannot be forced. It must emerge organically. He intervenes only when escalation threatens life or when the fragile networks of cooperation are at risk. His presence acts as a stabilizing force, proving that survival without cruelty is not only possible, but advantageous. The broken balance also amplifies uncertainty. Human authorities, ghouls resistant to Rimuru's methods, and rogue factions each test the limits of this new dynamic. Minor conflicts erupt unpredictably, forcing both sides to reassess strategies continuously. Yet even in these moments of tension, Rimuru's influence manifests. Violence is often avoided, escalation is mitigated, and lessons about restraint spread silently through observation. This dynamic creates a city in constant flux, a place where adaptability, awareness, and choice define survival, rather than pure strength or fear. As Tokyo struggles to adapt, the true significance of Rimuru's presence becomes clear. He is not a conqueror or a savior. He is a catalyst, an anomaly whose existence challenges every assumption the city has relied upon for decades. Humans and ghouls alike are forced to confront the consequences of choice, the possibility of restraint, and the fragility of systems built on fear and dominance. The balance is broken, not destroyed, and within that fracture lies the potential for something entirely new. A city where survival is defined not by instinct or violence, but by the conscious decisions of those who inhabit it. Rimuru stands at the center of this new paradigm, observing the ebb and flow of conflict and cooperation. Every intervention, every demonstration of restraint, every opportunity given to choose a better path reinforces the principle that power and survival need not equate to destruction. The predators of Tokyo no longer operate under absolute rules, and the humans tasked with enforcing order are forced to confront their limitations. In this broken balance, uncertainty reigns, but so too does possibility. The city is no longer predictable, its hierarchy no longer absolute, and its future, once determined by fear, now depends on choice, consequence, and the subtle, transformative presence of a being who refuses to play by the old rules. The transformation of Tokyo reaches its most profound stage as the fractured balance begins to redefine the city's identity. Ghouls who once existed only as predators are now experimenting with coexistence, establishing networks of cooperation, and even protecting humans when circumstances allow. Hunger, while still present, is no longer the absolute determinant of behavior. The predator-prey dynamic has been disrupted so thoroughly that neither side can operate under old assumptions. Rivalries continue, but they no longer dictate life or death outcomes as they once did. Small enclaves of stability emerge, guided not by fear but by choice, collaboration, and the subtle influence of Rimuru, whose interventions continue to ripple silently through the city. The CCG faces an unprecedented crisis of understanding. Investigators accustomed to a world of predictable threats now confront anomalies that defy categorization. Behavior once assumed to be instinctual, violent, aggressive, and unrelenting is now tempered by self-control, restraint, and cooperation. Analysts scramble to adjust predictive models, but Rimuru's interventions continually outpace human attempts at calculation. Even elite officers find themselves questioning doctrine and strategy, recognizing that their traditional methods are insufficient in a city where a single anomaly has redefined the rules. Confidence gives way to hesitation, and hesitation changes the very fabric of enforcement. Despite the growing influence of Rimuru's alternative path, resistance persists. Some ghouls cling fiercely to old hierarchies and instincts, refusing to consider the possibility of survival without predation. Others within the CCG view his presence as a threat to authority and human supremacy, pushing for direct confrontation despite the risks. Conflicts erupt unpredictably, yet Rimuru mitigates escalation with precision. He intervenes when necessary, but never to dominate. He shapes outcomes to minimize unnecessary suffering while preserving autonomy. Each success subtly reinforces the new paradigm, demonstrating that restraint, intelligence, and choice can alter the course of a city that once relied on fear and force. The very culture of Tokyo begins to shift. Neighborhoods once defined by bloodshed see collaboration take root among ghouls. Humans, observing anomalies and reconsidering old assumptions, begin to adapt strategies that incorporate patience, observation, and calculated restraint rather than blind aggression. Even ordinary citizens, though largely unaware of the forces at play, experience a quieter, safer city. The old hierarchy of predator and prey has dissolved into a dynamic ecosystem where every action carries consequence, and every choice can tip the balance in unforeseen ways. Rimuru's presence has not only broken the balance, it has introduced a new equilibrium, fragile yet full of potential. In the midst of this transformation, Rimuru remains calm and deliberate. He is neither conqueror nor savior. He is the catalyst, the quiet force that forces all of Tokyo's inhabitants to confront a new reality. Power no longer resides in strength alone, and survival no longer depends solely on fear or instinct. The city has become a crucible of choice, a place where every faction, human and ghoul alike, must reckon with the consequences of their actions. By refusing to dominate, Rimuru has created a world where restraint is a strength, cooperation is possible, and the old rules no longer apply. And so Tokyo stands at a crossroads. The predator-prey cycle has been fractured, the institutions of control destabilized, and the very definitions of survival and power have been challenged. The city is no longer predictable, and its future is no longer predetermined. Every decision, every action, and every moment of restraint carries weight. Humans and ghouls alike must navigate this new reality, learning to adapt, coexist, and make choices that were once impossible. Rimuru, at the center of it all, remains a calm presence, observing, guiding subtly, and reminding the city of a simple truth. Survival does not require cruelty. Power does not require domination, and even in a world built on fear, a new path is always possible. Before we wrap up, I want to know your thoughts. What would you do if Rimuru was in your city? Could humans and ghouls really coexist under this new balance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed exploring this what-if scenario, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next multiverse adventure. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where the possibilities are endless.